And now we're heading to Texas, where teachers who happen to be unlicensed are now the dominating new teacher hires. Infidel has a story. Infidel?
Yes. Well, in Texas schools, they're, as you mentioned, they're increasingly relying on unlicensed teachers to fill classroom vacancies. And nearly half in the 22 to 23 school year lack what we would call traditional teaching certificates. This trend has caused concern about the long-term impact on students and the overall integrity of the state's public education system. Teachers also find themselves on the firing line of the culture wars, navigating between contentious issues that are used by the state's politicians for their personal political gain, while the teachers, they're left overworked and, of course, underfunded. Critics argue that these measures do undermine the educational standards and they fail to address the root causes of the teacher shortage. Now, this story was from the San Antonio News by James P. Overschelde from May 6, 2024.
So, Infidel, how does the hiring of unlicensed teachers in rural Texas schools impact the overall quality of the education provided to the students?
Well, first, I know that from the experience of just being a parent, they start processes of how they teach things like math in particular, and they teach the kids to do it a certain way. And when you have someone like me, I may know how to do the math, but the little nuances of how they're teaching the child to do that, you essentially have to teach that process all over again. So I think that it would slow down the process of anyone coming in there who doesn't have that training that you would only get from going through that process. And also it's not just the mechanics of knowing the information, going through this process of learning and getting the certification and getting the degree to teach. You learn a lot more than just how to teach kids certain information, or more accurately, you learn the how part and not just the mechanics of what you're trying to teach them. And that's something that I think is really important. And without a doubt, there's part of that you can't teach, but it's really important that you have teachers, especially in rural areas where you tend to have impoverished children, English as a second language, and all these things, that they're probably equipped, or they're going to get overwhelmed. Even with the best of intentions, it's going to be even greater task for them to deal with in these situations where they have limited resources to fall back on too, because the people around them are less experienced as well.
Indeed, I definitely agree with that. It's something to say about a person who is in the classroom, who has been trained properly on how to teach a subject matter, and that's the reason why they earn their license versus just knowing a lot about the subject and thrown into a classroom.
Yep.
So, Cindy, I'm coming to you. I know you're kind of on the outside looking in and seeing like what the hell is going on in the United States now, and we agree. But I wanted to know, with you being in a different country and you're seeing this whole thing about a trend hiring these teachers who happen to be unlicensed. What, in your opinion, would be the implications of this current trend, and how do you see it differently as far as maybe how they do it in your particular country concerning how teachers are in the classroom versus in good old Texas?
There's a lot to say about this, because this specific article talks about one state and one specific solution to a huge problem, because education in the US is completely broken, and it's been broken on purpose. So the way I see it, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but this doesn't seem to be done on purpose. It's just we are being robbed of our teachers because they all leave because the work is shit and they're not paid enough, and so we do whatever we can to fill up the classrooms. So I don't think this is really a symptom of the problem. It's just a side effect. But the real problem is the entire system, like school boards that shouldn't exist, state education boards that shouldn't exist. Parents have nothing to say about what should be taught to kids. It's scientists with specialists of children who should be able to say on the federal level, okay, a kid needs to know this. They need to learn it this way or those ways, those different ways. But there is no reason why someone in Texas should learn a different thing from someone in California. And so this idea that we are going to recruit untrained people, on one hand, I don't think, I mean, if it weren't about Texas and the US, I would say it can be a good thing, because you have a lot of people out there who are specialized in their work, or they gained special knowledge into something like I did with critical thinking. I didn't go to school to learn all this. So those people should be able to bring their knowledge to the school without necessarily having to go through an education license. But this is not what's happening here. It's just like we have to rush people inside because we have no one, and we have all those kids. They need to go to school, and we have to fill up the classrooms. It's honestly it's scary, because it shows how broken the education system in the US is, and we all know here the implications of that.
Indeed. You know, I used to have this whole thing that, you know, parents should be more involved per se as far as like how to shape curriculum, but I've since changed my mind. And main reason being is because I've seen too many school board meetings where, you know, parents are using like their belief systems and their bad belief systems to really shape what is being taught in a classroom, and things that kids really need to know just so that they can be acclimated to the world around them is being taken out of the schools, just because, you know, parents says that, oh, we shouldn't, like this book right here by Toni Morrison is critical race theory, so we need to get it out, right? Or, you know, this particular book that talks about the LGBTQ experience and, you know, how they exist is sexualizing kids. But, you know, I wanted to come to you, Kelly, because, you know, kind of glancing over Les Notes, had a different viewpoint that you felt was a little more controversial. But go ahead, please explain.
I do and I don't. And I part of my disagreement is something that Cindy brought up. There are a lot of people out there who have a lot of knowledge and are really good at teaching other people that knowledge. And I don't see why we should keep those people out of schools, right? I taught at a small private high school. My ex-wife taught at a small private high school. Neither one of us had a degree in teaching. I do have a degree in English. I taught journalism, and I taught comparative religion. My ex-wife taught English, math, and her major was in drama. But she was able to communicate well. She knew the subject matter she was teaching. Now, neither one of us were elementary school teachers who had to be with the children all day long and teach them everything all day long. And that's a big, huge difference. And if I understand the core problem here. I mean, let's face it, there's been a systematic defunding of our educational system going on since at least the 1980s, you know, and as long as if we don't give it money, then it doesn't work right. And then we can stand up and say, look at this horrible educational system. We need to get rid of it and just send all the kids to religious schools instead, or some kind of private schooling instead. And that seems like the goal of all of the defunding, seems like to me. But that's why we're in this position now. We have schools that literally cannot pay for good teachers. So what are we going to do? One of the solutions might be to bring in people like me, my ex-wife, people that have this special knowledge, but treat the elementary school kids like you would be in high school. Maybe don't make the kids switch classes, make the teachers switch. For every hour, a new teacher comes in. And then maybe you can have somebody who's trained in childcare to be there all day long, right? And that way you're not having to pay for a professional teacher, because a teacher's not going to pay for the crap pay you're giving them today. And we might be able to solve this educational problem at least a little bit better than we are right now by hiring people that aren't qualified to be there with these kids all day long, teaching them all the subjects. So
my question is, and this is just to the panel, since we're bringing up this whole thing about special ability or knowledge that one has gained over time in their chosen area, what have you, that could possibly make them more apt to be able to be in a classroom. What should be the criteria for people who may fit that happen to be unlicensed, so that there is not a disparity as far as being able to make sure that children are getting a proper, well-rounded education? If I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go down to line to Cindy and then Kelly.
First, I have to say that I think that we're getting the cart before the horse here, so to speak, because before we start getting people in there who do have specialized skills that they have that would be very valuable for a child, we have to make sure that they have at least a base, because what's happening now isn't that, because yes, we're underpaying people and we're not going to get that specialization unless we start putting some money. But it does go back to what Kelly had mentioned earlier. I don't think this is a bug. I think this is a feature. I think that they want to see the public education system go to trash, to go to the total toilet, and they can flush it away and they can say, okay, voucher programs, we're going to send this money, and they're going to take public funds and they're going to send them to private organizations, mostly religious. And here's the most unfortunate part about it, is that in the areas that we're talking about now, in these rural areas, they're still going to be stuck in public schools that are even more severely underfunded at that point. Because then what's the incentive to have a private school in an area where you have rural, limited resources, limited profit? So what do? You avoid those areas. And so that's the areas we're going to see the people who need education the most have least access to it, because, yeah, we'll give them that public education, and that public education will be even more strained than it is now. So I think that it's just a matter of they don't care about these communities, and they really want the public education system to be an area that caters to the places where companies / churches, where it's just not profitable or less profitable for them and competition, and they could just play their game, and we'll have even worse education. But yes, as far as the criteria, the question as far as allowing other people outside, I think that's going to be very hard to clearly define. But first, we have to get a base going before we even have a hope of drawing in people like this.
Gotcha. Cindy?
Yeah, I agree. It depends on the age we're talking about, because bringing people with a specific knowledge is easier and more relevant, I'd say, after 12, 13 years old, where kids can learn one specific topic more deeply. I agree that before that, it should be focused on learning the basics. Regarding this feature instead of a bug, there's something we need to remember, is that on average, higher education makes people more liberal. So if you want people to stay conservative, then you take away their education. And that's the point here. Because when you look at the map of the presidential elections in the US, blue versus red, it's cities versus rural places. So it's just natural consequences of this.
And funding doesn't go to rural areas in the U.S. It just doesn't. I live in a very rural area. And it's not only education; it's medical. You know, we don't get doctors don't make any money here, so good doctors don't come. So it's a real problem in America. It really is. To answer your question about vetting, I think, I get one thing I want to say before I get into that. I think we would be better off, our whole educational system would be better off if we didn't tie it to lottery sales. That would make a big freaking difference right there, I think. And then for vetting, there's a lot of people out there who have education in things that aren't teaching. They're doing some other job. There's a lot of housewives out there, and I hate to use that term, but it's a thing, that have gone to college and ended up just being at home all day long. And maybe some of those women can go out, or some of those men. I was a house husband, so or maybe some of those men and women can go and teach what they've learned and aren't using. There are a lot of people who got a degree that are working part-time at the local fast food place or at the local convenience store. And that would give them a chance to go get a part-time job teaching the thing that they actually know and went to school for. So I think that for vetting, as you say, to make sure they know that. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that already have these educations. They just don't have an education in teaching, of controlling kids all day long and in child development and that type of thing. And that's why I think we should have somebody in charge of the classroom as a whole that doesn't really need to be a teacher per se, more like a child counselor or an overseer. So I don't know. Maybe it's an idea. That's all I can say.
Well, let's not use the word overseer.
Yeah, that's overseer. I didn't even think. No, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. I wasn't even thinking.
Got a little triggered there, Kelly.
You can slap me around later, Cynthia.
Yeah, we'll talk. Well, guys, I'm a little mixed about this whole thing because I was a teacher in a Southside charter school for about a year and a half. And I taught music. I taught first studio techniques, and then I moved on and graduated over to choir because, my training in college was music. And but I ended up with it, but my main degree was in science. Regardless, I would say that personally, as a personal anecdote, I wish that I had more teaching hours when I was in the classroom, because the kids that I had were kids that were in an alternative setting. They were not in like a regular public school or per se. This particular program that they were in was their last time to shine, or they're just done, right? So they had to make sure that they proved themselves, however you put it, in order for them to be able to get their education, or to finish their education. And one of the things that I really was disgusted about specifically is that the majority of the kids that were in that program were Black kids. And you had a lot of the kids that did not know how to read. They, the ones who did know how to read, did not know how to put together like an essay. Like no one really taught them how to formulate essays correctly. Even telling kids like, hey, when you're writing a paper, you can't write a paper the way that you talk. Well, at least you shouldn't, right? There's certain criteria that you should be following in order for you to present, a paper in a more academic setting versus, you just spitballing off the top of your dome, right? And I felt, and I know me per se, felt a bit not prepared as much as I felt that I could have been if maybe that criteria of being in so many hours of teaching outside of school, observation, things of that nature, in order for me to get licensed, that I probably would have been a bit more effective in the classroom. Even though like I was a person that cared. And I think that one of the things that these people who happen to be in these particular settings who are unlicensed, I really believe that they go into the classrooms because they do care about kids, they care about their education, and they care about them actually moving forward. But my only issue is that when they're not necessarily as prepared to teach kids properly, then disparities happen. Like, the article mentions that, these unlicensed teachers disproportionately affect Black students. They are 1.4 times more likely to be taught by unqualified teachers than their white peers. And same thing with bilingual students are 2.1 times more likely to have unlicensed teachers compared to native English speakers. And as we all mentioned about, rural students not necessarily having like the funding in those particular areas for like education, for medical care, et cetera, they're at a greater disparity, being 6 times more likely to be taught by an unqualified teacher than a suburban student. So there's this inequity that undermines the students that happens to be in these particular areas because, because of the structure, as Cindy has mentioned, that is the educational system that is especially very, very inequitable. Depending on your zip code, depending on your race, depending on if you're an immigrant or not, depending on or what kind of immigrant you are. Let's keep that a buck, and also all the other likelihoods when it comes to marginalization. So I think that the author's recommendations to aim to create a more equitable and effective education system in Texas remains, and increasing like highly qualified teachers is a must. But as we all mentioned, you got to put the funding in it. And unfortunately, I don't necessarily think that our country, especially when it comes to the ruling bodies, is settled on really investing in education when it comes to our kids. And it's very sad. And I personally don't like that education is more ruled by, local area per se having a standard criteria that should be on the federal level on down. But one of the things that is a standard criteria is watching more nonprofits. So click here.